18 days. Just 18 days. That is all it took for a speech that sounded like a warning to the world to collide headfirst with a photograph that left critics asking one explosive question: was this a heartfelt family moment, or was it the contradiction nobody was supposed to notice? Because what happened next wasn't just another royal controversy. It became a ticking clock, a timeline, a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight back to words that had barely stopped echoing across an international stage before a completely different image appeared online. And once people started placing those two moments side by side, the silence disappeared and the questions began.
Shameless grifters! This is a new low. Harry and Meghan have been blasted for their wild hypocrisy in doing speeches around the world about the dangers of the internet and social media, particularly regarding children, while splashing photographs of Archie and Lily all over social media.
This is totally bonkers. Meghan Markle has decided to use the 5th birthday of her own daughter to lash out while claiming to be the hero for protecting children from social media. We see you, Meghan, and your angry statement ain't going to shut us up.
18 days earlier, the Duchess stood before global health leaders in Geneva, speaking passionately about children, technology, attention, and the dangers lurking inside systems designed to keep young minds endlessly engaged. The message sounded serious, important, even admirable. It was the kind of speech that makes headlines for all the right reasons. The kind of speech supporters proudly share across social media. The kind of speech designed to position someone on the side of protection rather than exploitation. For a moment, many people believed that was exactly what they were seeing. But then something happened. Not months later, not years later, 18 days later, a birthday arrived, an Instagram post appeared, and suddenly the internet wasn't discussing the speech anymore. It was discussing the photograph. A simple birthday tribute should have been harmless. A mother celebrating her daughter. A sweet family moment. A loving caption. Yet somehow, that single upload detonated into one of the biggest hypocrisy debates the Duchess has faced in months. Why? Because critics immediately connected it to the very concerns she had just warned the world about.
Children are no longer just participants in digital spaces. They are too often the product. They didn't know that the platforms valued profit over people. We would never accept a food system that knowingly exposed children to harm.
But Meghan Markle, are you seriously saying, despite that rhetoric, that your 5-year-old daughter is giving you permission to share her image for money? I think there's nothing wrong with parents sharing their children online. But remember, Prince Harry has called it evil. He has attacked parents who are doing exactly what you were doing.
The reaction was immediate. Supporters saw warmth. Critics saw contradiction. Admirers saw family. Detractors saw strategy. And once those interpretations collided, the story exploded far beyond a birthday celebration. Suddenly, every detail mattered. The timing mattered. The wording mattered. Even the decision to disable comments became part of the conversation. What made this situation especially fascinating was that nobody was arguing over whether a parent has the right to share pictures of their child. That was never really the point. The debate centered on something much larger: consistency. Because when public figures build an image around certain principles, every future action gets measured against those principles. Fair or unfair, that's how public life works. Every statement creates a standard. Every speech creates an expectation, and every later decision gets compared against it. Then came another twist. Instead of allowing criticism to fade away naturally, reports emerged that a defense was already prepared. Explanations appeared. Arguments surfaced. Lines were drawn. And rather than calming the situation, those responses poured fuel onto an already raging fire.
She also said she wasn't going to serve her children to the media on a silver platter, specifically Archie. But now we have her serving her children on a silver platter to the same social media companies that she goes around campaigning against for, I guess, that dopamine hit. I am also imagine she is paid per post as an Instagram influencer. I do believe she's probably in that program, so that would be an incentive for her.
Royal commentators who had followed the Geneva appearance closely weren't holding back. Some described the timing as astonishing. Others questioned whether the message and the action could realistically coexist. The criticism wasn't focused on the existence of the photograph itself. It focused on what many perceived as a growing gap between public messaging and personal choices. And that is where this story became far bigger than a birthday picture. Because suddenly people weren't examining one Instagram post, they were examining a pattern. A pattern critics claim has been unfolding for years. Every time privacy becomes the topic, every time public exposure becomes the concern, every time social media risks become the warning, another question emerges. If privacy is truly the goal, why keep returning to the same platform? Why continue feeding the same machine being criticized? Why keep creating moments that inevitably generate headlines, debates, and engagement? Those questions became impossible to ignore. Then came the spokesperson's explanation. The argument was simple. Sharing moments is not the same as exposing children. Protecting identity while allowing carefully controlled glimpses of family life was presented as evidence that the principles discussed in Geneva were still being followed. At first glance, it sounded convincing, perhaps even reasonable, but critics immediately challenged that reasoning. They argued that the distinction wasn't nearly as clear as it was being presented. According to them, placing children in front of millions of followers still creates exposure, regardless of how carefully images are framed. In fact, some claim that partial visibility creates even greater curiosity because mystery itself becomes a powerful attraction. Suddenly, the discussion transformed from a debate about privacy into a debate about attention. And attention is where everything starts getting uncomfortable, because attention has value. Attention creates headlines. Attention creates engagement. Attention creates conversations. And attention is exactly what the Geneva speech had warned people about. That contradiction became the centerpiece of the entire controversy. Critics argued that this wasn't a spontaneous family moment uploaded without thought. They believed it was planned, calculated, anticipated, something prepared with full awareness of the reaction it would trigger. The existence of ready-made defenses only intensified that perception. Meanwhile, supporters pushed back fiercely. They insisted the comparison itself was unfair. They argued that one carefully selected birthday image is not remotely comparable to the endless social media exposure many children face daily. They pointed out that faces remained partially hidden, boundaries remained in place, protections remained active, and for a moment, both arguments seemed capable of standing. But then another uncomfortable detail emerged. The entire debate existed because of the calendar, not because of the photograph, not because of the caption, not because of the child. The calendar, 18 days. That number kept returning again and again. 18 days between warning the world about children becoming content and posting content featuring a child. And that is exactly where the entire defense starts to wobble. Because once you move beyond the emotional arguments and strip away the public relations language, you are left staring at one unavoidable reality. The same person who stood on an international stage warning about children being pulled into systems driven by engagement suddenly found herself defending a decision that generated exactly the kind of engagement she had just criticized. Whether you agree with the criticism or not, the optics were explosive. And in the world of royalty, celebrity, and public image, optics are often everything. What made the situation even more dramatic was the fact that the debate refused to die. Usually these stories burn brightly for 24 hours and then disappear beneath the next headline. Not this one. Every new commentator seemed to arrive at the same uncomfortable destination. Different publications, different personalities, different audiences. Yet somehow they kept circling back to the same word. Hypocrisy. That word began appearing everywhere, and once it enters a story, it becomes incredibly difficult to remove. The reason is simple. People can forgive mistakes. They can forgive misjudgments. They can even forgive contradictions if someone openly admits them. What people struggle to forgive is being told that two completely opposite things are somehow identical. That was the argument many critics believed they were being asked to accept. They were being told that a speech warning about exposure and a social media post creating exposure were actually part of the same protective mission. For some observers, that explanation felt less like a clarification and more like an attempt to rewrite reality. Then another layer emerged. The discussion stopped being about a single birthday post and started becoming a conversation about image management itself. Critics argued that the Duchess has spent years carefully controlling what the public sees and when they see it. Every photograph, every appearance, every glimpse, every reveal. Nothing happens accidentally. Everything arrives with precision. Everything arrives with purpose. And if that is true, then the birthday post wasn't simply a spontaneous act of motherhood. It was another carefully managed moment designed to create a specific reaction. That accusation became even louder when comparisons started appearing elsewhere. On the same day the birthday photographs dominated headlines, another royal figure was attracting attention for entirely different reasons. While one story revolved around Instagram publicity and social media strategy, strategy, another revolved around in-person engagement, charity work, and quiet public service. Suddenly, people weren't just discussing one royal woman. They were comparing two completely different approaches to public life. Fairly or unfairly, those comparisons created an even harsher spotlight, and that spotlight exposed something the Montecito camp may not have anticipated. The public wasn't really arguing about photographs anymore. They were arguing about credibility, because credibility is fragile. It takes years to build and seconds to damage. Every public speech depends on it. Every campaign depends on it. Every warning depends on it. The moment people begin questioning whether the messenger follows the message, the entire foundation starts shaking. Now, supporters continue to make a strong case. They argue that a single birthday photograph is not the same thing as endless online exploitation. They insist that keeping faces partially hidden does provide protection. They believe the criticism has been exaggerated beyond reason. And to be fair, there is truth inside those arguments. Even experts acknowledge that limiting visibility can reduce risks. That point cannot simply be ignored. The timing transformed a simple family post into a global debate. The timing turned a private celebration into a public contradiction. The timing forced people to place two moments side by side and decide whether they belong together or whether they expose something much larger. And that is where this story remains tonight. One side sees a protective mother sharing a carefully controlled glimpse of family life. The other sees a public figure breaking her own warning less than 3 weeks after delivering it. One side sees consistency. The other sees contradiction. One side sees protection. The other sees content. What nobody can deny is that she knew exactly what she was doing when she pressed publish. She knew people would compare the speech and the photograph. She knew questions would follow. She knew headlines would explode. Yet she posted it anyway. That single decision tells its own story. And perhaps that is the biggest mystery of all. Not whether the critics are right, not whether the supporters are right, but whether the Duchess genuinely believed nobody would place those two moments side by side. Because the second people did, the entire conversation changed. 18 days became the number nobody could stop repeating. The speech became impossible to separate from the photograph, and a birthday post became one of the most talked about royal controversies of the year.